Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. It is the second of the week, as this time around we're going to be covering PFL first round 2, their 2025 World Tournament. It's weird how they keep naming these things different things, but it is their second event of the first round of their newly minted World Tournament that they're changing their format to after the whole regular season from the last couple of years. So fun addition, decent showing for them last time around. Obviously, Thad Jean with the big victory. Movlid Khabulaev pulls one out of the jaws of defeat pretty much there. And now this week, I believe we're focusing on men's bantamweights and women's flyweights. So we got a total of 9 fights. That includes 8 tournament fights and 1 alternate fight. One alternate was already pushed up into the World Tournament after, unfortunately, the favorite to win the women's flyweight bracket, Taila Santos, was forced to pull out of the matchup. Not entirely sure why, but in steps Ekaterina Shakalova, who will now be taking on Juliana Velasquez. So I gotta say, out of the 4 first round cards that the PFL has over the next few weeks, this might be the weakest one of them, but should still deliver on some fun fights, entertaining fights, and maybe after this event we'll figure out who is the favorite to win some of these tournaments here. So looking forward to breaking down this 9-fight card for you guys. Last week when I broke down the PFL card, I dropped it on Monday and the fight card was on Thursday, and there was a ton of changes between that point. So I'm going to try to do it the day before weigh-ins, and hopefully that reduces the amount of changes that we have. And again, if there ever is changes to a PFL card, I'll quickly update it in the comment section below. I'll pin my comment and let you guys know what my prediction is for the new matchup. So don't worry about any changes in regard to that. I'll have track plays for this card, which I did pretty well on last week. So if you want to jump on that, you guys can check out the MMA LOT and Patreon page. I think we nearly swept the card. I think the only loss that we had was Adam Borix last week, but still managed to profit a good amount. Lock of the night hit as well, so very happy about that. And we'll see if we can continue the good times on for this second PFL card. All right. I don't want to waste too much more time. I do want to quickly plug, actually, the Legacy Warriors podcast, breaking down LFA 206, I believe is the number. That'll be dropping tomorrow, on Thursday. So keep your eyes peeled for, I guess that is tomorrow. But that'll be coming out Thursday, breaking down the entire LFA card for you guys as well. All right. Let's get right into this. 9 fights, like I said, the first of which is going to be the alternate for the men's bantamweight tournament between Marceli Alves, who comes in at -200, going up against Wilson Nenjagroni. Butchered it, going to go with Wilson. He comes in at +170. Now, Alves has a 1-1 record under the Bellator banner, but now he turns his attention to the PFL and hoping to be successful here. He's a former Jungle Fight champion with 9 of his 11 wins coming by knockout. And that's a perfect example of, or perfect evidence and proof of to what kind of fighter this guy is. He loves to crash the pocket, landing big shots by stalking his opponents, throwing a lot of wide winging hooks, but more often than not catches his opponents and is able to put them away. Where we've seen him struggle in the past and how he lost his last fight is when opponents look to take them to the ground and try to muzzle his offense by keeping him on his back. His grappling is slowly improving, but there are a level of grappler that can take him down and keep him there. And unfortunately for him, I think he's fighting somebody like that here in Wilson Nenjagroni, who is a former CFFC champion. He's 6-1 over his last 7 fights, and the fight that he lost in that span, it was a Fury FC fight, I believe against Justice Torres, and I thought it was a close fight. Torres probably should have won because of the amount of damage he was inflicting, but Wilson was still able to get off on some solid success with his grappling, some good damage as well, and I think he's better off with 3-round fights than he is in 5-round fights, and I think that's why this fight is very beneficial for him. He trains out of K Dojo out of New Jersey, which is known for current LFA welterweight champion Shamid Khan Magomedov, but was also the first MMA gym that Khabib Nurmagomedov trained at when he moved on to this side of the planet. Started off in New Jersey, then went over to AKA at San Francisco. So very solid training camp from there. Obviously improving his striking, as we saw with the head kick knockout that he had in his last matchup. And I think he can be, smart enough and safe enough in the striking realm here against Alves, and I think that will eventually allow him to change levels as Alves gets a little bit too overextends on a lot of his punches, which allows for opponents to change levels and get him to the ground. And I think we'll see that type of fight IQ here from Wilson to get this fight to the ground, get some good control time, and get off on some damage. So I think we'll see the underdog pull off the upset to kick off the card here, and I think he does it by decision. All right, first women's flyweight matchup here for the tournament. We got Elora Dana coming in at plus 110, going up against Diana Avsaragova, who comes in at minus 130. Now, Dana will be making her PFL debut, or at least major MMA in North America debut here, coming in with a 7-0 record, finishing 5 of those opponents. She's the Jungle Fight flyweight champion as well, so that's obviously a very respected promotion down there in Brazil. She's a BJJ brown belt, a little bit aggressive, but a little bit to a fault as well, which is where we've seen the better fighters on her record take advantage of her. In her last matchup, it looked like she was on the brink of defeat. She was gassing out. She was being backed up the entire time, and her opponent had a little bit of a lapse in judgment, which ultimately allowed Dana to land a big shot and get her out of there. So she was able to save her undefeated streak by getting off on that knockout victory. She has trained alongside Paulo Costa and Natalia Silva in the past. She has a clean record and some solid potential, but now facing, opponents that will actually give her legitimate resistance, we'll truly see what her potential is. She's going up against Diana Avsaragova, who suffered her first pro defeat back in August of 2023, and she's been on the sidelines ever since. That night, she came up short against Justine Kish, who is a former UFC fighter who was able to cut off the, lateral movement that we normally see from Avsaragova, and that allowed Kish to get off in a little bit more combinations, and optically speaking, it seems she was a little bit more busy and landing more damage throughout it. I think that was a good learning lesson for Avsaragova, who is, won every single one of her fights leading up to that matchup, and it kind of will be a good learning lesson for her to try to up the volume a little bit more, or even get back to some of the grappling we've seen from her in the past, that she showcased some solid dominance from that top position. Normally at her best, we see her mixing in the takedowns, but even in the striking realm, utilizing solid footwork and movement to really pin her opponents from distance, or at least snipe her opponents from distance. Solid training partners. She's trained over there at Black House in LA as well. She came up alongside Liana Jojua. That's how I originally heard about her. But the one thing that we have to keep an eye on is she did miss weight in her last 2 fights, and she's still fighting at the same weight class. So we'll see if she's able to get that under wraps here, but she is a fun fighter to watch. And I think she has the technical striking advantages here to take advantage of the over-aggressive nature of Elora Dana. Dana might be able to have some success with making it optically look good in her favor, but I actually think we'll see Avsaragova snipe her very effectively over the course of 15 minutes, and that might produce a knockout for her, but I think it ultimately goes to a decision, and I think we'll see, even though Dana might be able to get up on the numbers here, I think we'll see the more effective strikes come from the Avsaragova side, and I think that will lead to her winning this fight on the scorecards. All right, next up, we got Kana Watanabe coming in at plus 150, going up against Jenna Bishop, who comes in at minus 175. Now, these are a pair of grapplers who are a little bit different in terms of what their approaches are and how they implement them. Watanabe is a little bit more of a desperation grappler who just immediately goes for the takedowns, tries to create scrambles and smother her opponents from on top. She's kind of had a bit of a roller coaster run in, or at least on the North American side of things. She was able to get those wins over Denise Keelholz, Vita Ortega, and even Shanna Young. But when she faced Liz Carmouche 2 times, very tough fights there. The first fight obviously being finished in 35 seconds with a standing TKO, and then in the next one it seems she was doing pretty well over the course of 15 minutes or 14 minutes, I should say, with Carmouche obviously having her success as well. But it was ultimately that armbar that Carmouche threw up and landed with about 8 seconds left on the clock that forced a tap from the Japanese fighter. And then even the Ilima-Lei Macfarlane fight, I thought Watanabe did enough, and there might have been some hometown cooking in that decision, hence why Macfarlane ended up coming out with the victory that night. Yeah, Watanabe, very strong grappler, very strong wrestler. Often makes a little bit too many mistakes in terms of with her control at times, allowing opponents to kind of reverse the position or throw submissions up at her. And I think that's the issue she's going to face here against the high-level BJJ black belt that Jenna Bishop brings to the table. She started her career 7-0, and now finds herself on a 2-fight losing streak, one of those being to former UFC title challenger Tyler Santos. She lost that by split, kind of a close fight, but for the most part, it seemed like Santos was out grappling her and utilizing her physicality to kind of muzzle Bishop's BJJ. And then last time around, obviously coming up short against Dakota Ditcheva, who ended up becoming the PFL champion for last season. She was able to stop the takedowns of Bishop and then absolutely piece her up on the feet until she eventually got that finish. Bishop, high-level BJJ black belt, like I said, but it seems like women that are more physically imposing than her can cause her some issues. Here against Watanabe, the issue that I have with backing Bishop as the favorite is that this seems like one of those fights where you're going to be backing somebody who's losing for the majority of the fight until they eventually throw up that submission or, land a big knockout shot to get them out of there. And in this case for Bishop, she's going to have to be fishing for submissions off her back because Watanabe will be very aggressive with her takedowns and her top control. We've seen Watanabe obviously get caught in an armbar by somebody like Liz Carmouche, and it's possible Jenna Bishop can do the same thing. But to bank on her to do that at -175, I think is a little bit irresponsible. Maybe targeting her submission prop if it's at a good enough line, because at least you can get more, meat on that bone kind of. But again, Watanabe is going to make this a tough, grueling fight. And if she doesn't give Bishop the space to throw up submissions here, Bishop might just lose this fight playing jiu-jitsu off her back, hoping that she'll eventually sink in a submission within 15 minutes. So I'm picking Bishop to win, but I don't want to bet on this spot. I would rather take the submission prop, which, again, at the time of this recording has not released. If it's at anything plus 200 or better, I'd be willing to part ways with my money for that. But this will be a grueling fight. But I ultimately think the BJJ Bishop will pay off for her here. Our next up, Matheus Matos coming in at +100, going up against former UFC fighter Jake Hadley, who comes in at -120. Now, Matos actually had a history with the UFC as well. He was on the Ultimate Fighter Brazil back in 2015, and he ultimately came up short in his second matchup, I believe it was. And then from there was sent back to the regional scene where, he had a decent run. The only guys that his losses have come to are guys with a combined record of 38-3, with those names including Kasumov, who I'll be talking about in a few fights here, Magomed Magomedov, and former UFC bantamweight champion Petr Yan. Matos is a very aggressive fighter that utilizes a very solid Muay Thai game, has a nasty leg kicking game as well, and uses combinations very effectively, especially with the power that he puts together. He also has a slick BJJ game, but we don't often see him use it offensively because he normally likes to walk his opponents down and try to knock them out. His opponent this weekend is Jake Hadley, who unfortunately went 3-4 with the UFC and was cut after his last matchup, which was a short notice acceptance by Cameron Simon, who was able to outbox Hadley over the course of 15 minutes and win that fight on the scorecards as a +400 underdog. Hadley is a guy that, on the come up to the UFC and the Contender Series, had largely showcased a grapple-heavy approach, muzzling opponents on the ground and quickly working to finishing positions. Next up, he ended up getting to the UFC, and we saw him a little bit more focused on trying to get off on damage in the striking realm, and it worked for guys like Colin Loughran, but outside of that, he very much struggled to try to get off on his boxing to defeat his opponents. He's still 28 years old, and he's still capable of turning things around, but I have some question marks in terms of, what kind of fight IQ and what kind of game planning we'll often see from him as he starts competing against some of these PFL guys. Now, going up against Matos, I think this is a tough fight for Hadley. I think that this is one where the power and the BJJ of Matos could really allow him to dictate the pace of this fight. So even if Hadley looks to take this fight to the ground, I think he'll struggle to hold Matos in compromising positions, which will ultimately allow Matos to either reverse position, throw up a submission, look to work back to his feet, and then from there start throwing with his aggressive approach. But I do like Matos here, and I think that he can land more damage over the course of 15 minutes and end up winning this fight on the scorecards. So to get him at that slight plus money line here, I think it's not a bad shot either. All right, next up, Juliana Velasquez coming in at minus 180, going up against Ekaterina Shakalova, who comes in at plus 155. Now, Velasquez is somebody who I'm sure last time around was thankful that she did not have to fight somebody like Liz Carmouche. She had lost 3 straight fights to Carmouche and then eventually was able to bounce back with a victory in her last fight. Normally, she likes to utilize a heavy wrestling approach, nullifying opponents on the ground and smashing them from that top position, but she just couldn't get that off against somebody like Carmouche, who's very physical and obviously very slick with her BJJ as well. Velasquez, 38 years old now. You got to wonder when the wheels are going to start falling off. But she's still very physical. She's still very strong, and she's very experienced as well. She's going up against Shakalova, who had her 7-fight winning streaks shattered last time back in May as she came up short against Aspen Ladd. She was 1-1 with Bellator, with that first victory coming over Diana Silva in a very close fight that went to a split decision, and she ended up getting her hand raised. That night, we saw her kind of go away from the grappling and try to implement more of a movement-based striking approach where she utilized a ton of lateral movement and then often crashed the pocket with combinations. Even if they weren't landing that effectively, they're enough for her to, make it look like she was winning the fight on at least 2 judges' scorecards. She tried to do the same thing against Aspen Ladd, and it did not pay off for her as Ladd ended up landing the more effective damage clearly, even though the optics seemed like Shakalova was the one moving and throwing a lot more. It was obvious that Shakalova was wearing more of the damage once the final bell rang. In this matchup against Velasquez, I think it'll be harder for Shakalova to get to that because I think we'll actually see Velasquez successful with a wrestling approach. Now, in the off chance that she's not, the constant movement and output and visuals of Shakalova blitzing the pocket and landing big shots could make this fight a little bit closer than the odds actually indicate. It's a close fight, in my opinion. I do think with the skill set in mind and assuming that Velasquez should be able to get off on some control here, the minus 185, minus 180 line makes sense to me. And I just don't really see enough value on either side to take a shot. So obviously the over 2.5 is at minus 400. So you can kind of expect how this fight will likely go down. But I'm going to go with the former Bellator champion here and in Velasquez, but I'll probably pass on betting it as well. All right, next up, we got Kasum Kasumov coming in at minus 550, going up against Justin Wetzel, who comes in at plus 400. Now, Kasumov last time around had a very solid matchup against Matthias Matos, and he pretty much ran through him. He was able to land the takedowns. He was able to control him throughout and land big shots from that top position and avoid most of the aggressive striking from the Brazilian fighter. Kasumov, solid record. I think he only has 1 defeat on his record. I think he's 14-1 or 15-1. Very hot prospect as well, and was actually scheduled to compete for the Bellator bantamweight title before Bellator ended up closing its doors. So now he has to turn his attention to the PFL World Tournament. Hopefully get to the end there, get a PFL shiny belt after that, and then maybe fight the PFL bantamweight champion Patchy Mix, I believe, if he's able to win the tournament this year. Very solid wrestling, like I said, good enough striking to eventually mix in the grappling and then control opponents from that top position, and he has very stellar control as well. He's going up against Justin Wetzel, who returned to the LFA last time around and was able to capture victory in the main event against former tough contestant Beksad Usmanov in a fight where we saw Wetzel's wrestling really pay off for him, really controlling Usmanov on the ground, even pushing him up against the cage, getting that back position and riding him and just landing enough shots to not get separated. His striking, not the greatest, although it's good enough. Training at a solid training camp out there in Colorado, often being cornered by Corey Sandhagen, top UFC bantamweight. Wetzel, again, very solid North American prospect. I think if he stuck with the LFA side of things, he probably would have made a case for himself to at least compete for the Contender Series. But fighting some of the top guys in PFL, I think we'll see some of the flaws in his game, hence why he finds himself as a plus 400 underdog in this fight. I think although it might be competitive early, it's going to ultimately be the Russian wrestling of Kasumov that ends up reigning supreme. I think he'll be able to scramble well enough to keep Wetzel from getting any dominant positions, and I think as this fight starts to get into deeper water, we'll see Kasumov really starting to successfully secure those dominant positions and keeping Wetzel in bad spots. Kasumov was closer to minus 350 when I studied this fight a few days ago. Now finds himself at minus 550. We get it. Whenever you get a Russian wrestler with an Ov in the last name, they're often going to be very heavy favorites. And in this matchup, I think it is completely justified. All right. Next up, we got Francesco Nuzzi coming in at minus 275, going up against Mando Gutierrez, who comes in at plus 235. Now, starting off on the Nuzzi side of things, it was unfortunate that we haven't seen him in action for over 2 years now. And the last time we saw him actually snipe his opponent with a nasty head kick in less than 2 minutes back in July of 2023. He's been scheduled 3 different times since then, but for various reasons was not able to make those dates. And he was actually scheduled to fight Matthias Matos on this card, but an injury pulled out Matos and eventually put him back. I think it was an injury or a visa issue, and then eventually Matos was able to step back in here. Nuzzi likes to tread at distance and try to snipe opponents with his long shots down the pipe or his head kicks from different distance. And he also has a win over current UFC fighter Bernardo Sopai from back in March of 2021. He's a BJJ brown belt who trains out of a solid gym in Italy, but it seems like he's moved to the Charles Oliveira training camp down there in Brazil, at least for the last 10 or 11 weeks, to prepare for this weekend's event. He's going up against Mando Gutierrez, who we know from a few different UFC approaches. He was on the Contender Series back in 2021 or 2022, I believe, where he took on a 17-year-old Raul Rosas Jr., and he got defeated by decision that night. He was then given an opportunity on the Ultimate Fighter 31, where he ended up losing to he lost his first fight to eventual finalist Cody Gibson, and he's a grinding grappler. He is a guy that likes to take opponents down and smother them with his control, smother them with his pace, work for TKO finishes. And now he is on a 2-fight winning streak, where he actually had one of his fights over there in Japan as well, trying to broaden his horizons, essentially. I wish he would trust his hands a little bit more. He seems like he has the speed and explosiveness to be effective with it if that's what he chooses to do. Maybe that will allow him to mix in his grappling a little bit easier and try to get to that wrestling, without so much resistance. And that's where he could potentially find some success against Nuzzi here. I think Gutierrez is the better grappler, but he has to set it up properly here against a better striker. And if he can maybe think or get Nuzzi to think that he's going to strike with him for a bit, he'll be able to surprise him with the takedown and actually accrue some solid control time. I'm still going to lean with Nuzzi though, because I believe that he has good enough takedown defense and a good enough striking game to really keep Gutierrez at bay. I think he can make Gutierrez pay for some of these sloppy takedown attempts that will eventually come the longer that we get into the fight. Nuzzi by knockout could absolutely be a possibility. But I feel compelled to, I don't know if I'll actually get to it, but even a half unit shot on Gutierrez, considering the grappling advantage he should hold in this fight. If he just changes it up a little bit, he could have tremendous success here. And again, Nuzzi, a guy that prefers keeping fights in the stand-up realm. So it's clear he's going to be at a disadvantage should this fight hit the mat. He is a BJJ brown belt, though, so I don't want to completely count it out. But we know strong wrestlers can often nullify anybody with a BJJ background as well. But I'm going to go Nuzzi. I'm going to go Nuzzi by knockout, but I wouldn't mind anybody looking to take a shot on Gutierrez for some of the value you can get there. All right, co-main event time now, as we have former Bellator champion Liz Carmouche coming in at minus 850, going up against Alara Joanny, who comes in at plus 600. I don't want to get too far into this matchup because I don't think there is enough value on Joanny to consider her at plus 600. I get it. Carmouche is up there in age, 41 years old, if I'm not mistaken at this point in time. But I think that her grappling and her jiu-jitsu are too superior for Joanny, and I think it will ultimately lead to Carmouche getting that quick submission win here. I think Carmouche has good enough striking to handle that aggressive nature of Joanny, but eventually Carmouche will be able to land an explosive double leg, get this fight to the ground, and I think from there she should be able to quickly get to these dominant positions and find that submission victory. So again, don't want to spend too much time on this. Minus 850 is a prohibitive favorite to me anyway, so even trying to think about parlaying Carmouche at that number, I think it's not the smart thing to do. It's she's 41. She's, Joanne can pack a little bit of power. We might see a just dramatic decline from Carmouche in this matchup. But again, there's just not enough bang for your buck at minus 850. Maybe if you can get Carmouche by submission at some sort of plus money, that might be the best way to go about it. But I want nothing to do with this fight. I think Carmouche gets that submission within a round and a half. All right. Main event now, where we got Leandro Higo coming in at minus 400 going up against Josh Reddinghouse, who comes in at plus 300. Now, starting off on the Higo side of things, he was actually scheduled to fight Patchy Mix for the Bellator title back in November. Unfortunately, the mismanaging of the Bellator brand by the PFL brass caused the Bellator brand to shut down completely, and now Higo is forced to come into the PFL tournament if he hopes to get any sort of gold around his waist. Very aggressive striker, just as you would expect from his, stablemates, the Pitbull brothers. Obviously, Patricio debuting with the UFC this weekend as well, so hopefully these guys can kind of peak at the same time. And Higo also has a very aggressive BJJ game where 14 of his 23 wins have come by submission. I like his aggressiveness and his unwillingness to settle for bad positions, and how consistent he stays with dishing out damage no matter what position he finds himself in. I think he could be one of the favorites to win this entire tournament, maybe outside of Kasumov, but that would be a very fun fight if that is the matchup that ends up being put together in one of these upcoming rounds. But he still has to get past Josh Reddinghouse, who was a top 29 competitor back in 2021. He came up in the first round of fights against Brady Hiestand in a bloody battle that lasted the full 3 rounds, but ultimately it was Hiestand who was able to get his hand raised. Reddinghouse normally shows a solid all-around game with good striking and a grapple-heavy approach if that's what he chooses to approach it with. But now he's 4-0 since that loss on the Ultimate Fighter back in the day. One of those was a first-round knockout over former UFC fighter Chris Beal as well. Unfortunately, he's just not been all that busy in terms of mixed martial arts. This will be his 6th fight since 2020, so nearly a fight per year since then. And two of the 4 wins that he's currently on right now, the winning streak that he's on, are against guys that had losing records as well. He's 35 years old. I think he's really up against it here against the Brazilian Higo, who's just a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more effective overall, from his striking to his grappling to his BJJ. I think he can keep Reddinghouse on the defensive for the most part. Minus 400, a little bit too wide considering the experience and just overall MMA game of Reddinghouse. But I still think Higo wins, lands more damage, ends up getting the scorecards to be in his favor, and we see Higo advance to the next round. There you guys go. Not the best card in terms of betting, in my opinion. A lot of chalk, a lot of, risky chalk as well. So people might just go ahead and parlay all the chalk here and just assume that it's going to hit. But, there might be a landmine here or there that I would be very careful of. So I would kind of reduce your action on this card compared to a normal PFL card just to be on the safe side. So I have a few plays for the cards for the card that I put on the Patreon page, so you can check that out if you want. Hopefully we can continue our winning ways from the first PFL card from last week. And yeah, that's pretty much a wrap on the PFL fights here. So PFL will be back again next week, so I'll be sure to drop that for you guys the day before the weigh-ins, so stay tuned for that. Otherwise, if you want the UFC content and the LFA content, make sure you guys check out the rest of the YouTube page here, as I have content dropping pretty much every single day of the week. Always something new to watch from your boy, covering the upcoming MMA events. Make sure you guys check it out. Hit that subscribe if you haven't already. I'd love to hit 10,000 subscribers by the ending of the year. I know that's a long time away from now, but we're at about 8,600 subscribers, very close to that 8,600 mark. Let's try to get 1,400 by the end of the year. And I know a lot of you guys watch this PFL content, so if you have yet to subscribe, please, you are doing me a huge favor by dropping that subscribe on the YouTube channel. It's free. That click is free. Try it out, please. Very much appreciated. All right, good luck on your action this week, folks, and I'll be back later this evening to drop my quick picks version of the UFC 314 breakdown. See you guys then. Peace.